So today we're going to be taking a look at X. Yep, that's the title on this one, just regular ass X. And it is considered as an action, supernatural, and apocalyptic theme. But one thing that does make this one kind of interesting in my case is that I've actually watched this show once before, but I never actually watched the whole thing of it. And how I first heard about the show was actually kind of funny. Quite a few years ago, around my old place, I used to go to the thrift stores quite a lot. And one day I actually found a wall scroll of this show and I thought, oh, that looks fucking cool. So I ended up buying it even though I've never even heard about the show whatsoever. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to watch this show, because I had a poster of it and I figured, well, I might as well watch it, right? But this time I've actually seen the whole thing, so now let's start talking about that. So let's start off with the story. So it begins in the year 1999 and it stars the main character, Kamui. And he returns to Tokyo after being gone for 6 years. So the reason for his returning has to do with the fact that he wants to protect the people that he really cares about, like Kotori and Fuma. But while he does want to protect them, he does kind of act like an asshole towards them, because he's just that edgy. So while things may seem somewhat average, Armageddon is about to lift its ugly head. So there are two different factions that have different ideas for the future that do want to either prevent Armageddon or to start it. And they are the Dragons of Heaven or the Dragons of Earth. And they all consist of different members with some very different personalities and ideas. So for the Dragons of Heaven, you have Sorata, who is a teenager with lightning powers who just happens to look like a wannabe gangster. And then there's Arashi. She happens to be a really good sword wielder and she's also pretty blunt. And then there's Subaru, who is also a part of the Sumeragi clan. He's also very oppressed and also wants to take revenge on someone. And then there's Seijuro, who is a copy editor with a wife and family, but secretly he has some wind powers. And then there's Karen, who has the power to manipulate fire, and she is also pretty religious. And finally, there is Yuzahara, who is a schoolgirl who happens to have a spirit dog that cannot be seen by most people. And of course you expect her to be the super positive, cheerful type. So that's all the members of the Dragons of Heaven. Now there's the Dragons of Earth. So there's Yuto, who happens to be a college student, and one thing that is kind of interesting with this character is that he actually appeared in another work from Clamp, and that happened to be a manga series called Like Stars Army War. Then there's Satsuki, who happens to go through the digital world and can go through binary code and such. Basically, her powers are kind of like the Matrix. And then there's Seijuro, who happens to be a veterinarian. And then there's Nadaku, who happens to have psychic powers. And then there's Kagyo, who can go into other people's dreams. And finally, there's Kusanagi, and he can telepathically link to plants and animals. So yeah, there's quite a lot of characters here. But one last thing I should mention about them is that some of them do have a special power to create spiritual barriers. And basically these barriers are different dimensions, where it takes whatever they're in their surroundings but puts into a different dimension, so even if there's like other people around, they just happen to like not notice it whatsoever. So anyways, all these characters from different factions want Kamui to join, since he has a special power that has something to do with the sacred sword. So I think I'll leave it there when talking about the basics of the story. So it's one of those end of the world scenarios, but does have a different take on it. And I'll talk a little bit more on that later, so now let's start moving on to the other things, like the animation. And the animation in this one is pretty fucking awesome. But I had expected this, since this is a show based after a manga that is written by Clamp, so yeah, that's always awesome. So all the character designs look really good, all the backgrounds are really good, all the fight scenes look pretty epic, and yeah, there's just not a whole lot of complaints I have here. So if I say so myself, I think it's pretty top notch. And as for the music, same exact thing, I think it's also really fucking good. So this show has a lot of like orchestrated music which sounds really epic movie-like, which, you know, I'm a huge fan of. And of course all the songs are very memorable to me, which is also really good. But as awesome as the music is, sadly to say, the opening theme song I can't say the same thing about. Now the opening isn't bad, I just didn't really care for it. Personally, if I had any song to pick from to pick the opening for this show, I probably would have had to pick X from the band X Japan. And yes, full pun intended, but at the same time, at least the song is fucking awesome. But obviously, that's just wishful thinking, but either way, the opening theme song isn't bad, I just didn't really care for it too much. But everything else about the music within the show itself is just really good. So now, as for the voice acting within this one, before I say my thoughts on it, let's go over the cast real quick. So we have Steve Staley, Crispin Freeman, Dave Wittenberg, Tony Oliver, Leah Sargent, Philly Sampler, Wendy Lee, Steve Blum, Karen Strassman, Mona Marshall, Jameson Pierce, Bridget Hoffman, Mary Elizabeth McLean, Michelle Ruff, and Richard Consino. So with this many of great talents we have, you expect this one to be damn good, right? Well, not quite. So here's the thing. Some roles are done pretty well for the most part, and then there are some roles that just don't really fit the characters well, and then there are others that are very inconsistent. And sadly, some of them do sound a bit bland, which is a damn shame. But while the overall voice work for this show is a mixed bag, at least for the roles here that were not done that well, at least they were not downright awful. It's just disappointing really, considering the cast. So now, as for the overall score for this one, I think I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. And I'll be honest, the 7 is slightly generous, but the thing is, I did like this one for what it was, but there were a couple things about it that I just wish could have been done a lot better. So the things that could have been done better is the pacing of this show, because this show can be really slow, especially the beginning. So because of this, I found that a couple episodes were pretty boring. But the good thing is that at least the episodes that are not boring are at least really good. So at least that does make up for the parts that do kind of drag on a bit. But now let's talk about the good. So I really like the concept for this anime, I also really like the characters, and as I said, the fight scenes are awesome, the animation is top notch, and the music is just really freaking good. So I'd say giving this one a 7 is a fair score, considering that this show is pretty flawed, but I still enjoyed it for what it was, but it's definitely more good than bad. And because this show is based after a manga, I would like to read it someday. And I do like this show for what it is, but I'm willing to bet that the manga for it is just way better. So while I think that this show probably could have been done a lot better considering the premise and whatnot, I still like it, but I definitely don't consider it a favorite, but I do think it is at least just good. But I do think recommending this one to other people might be a bit tough, because like I said, there's a lot of slow moments within this one, and of course the beginning of this show kinda makes it seem like a lot more complicated than it actually is. So I would at least say, if this show does sound interesting to you, I'd say give it a shot. Because it's really not a bad show, but it's also not the most amazing thing I've ever seen either. So I guess you can say that X sorta hits the mark.